Good afternoon and welcome to our April 8th, 2024 afternoon land use hearing. As is our tradition, we'll call this meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. And again, welcome and good afternoon. My name is John Kafalis, Larimer County Commissioner from District 1. I'm joined by my Commissioner colleagues, Kristen Stevens from District 2 and Jody Sheddock McNally from District 3. We have behind us Tessa Beatty from the Clerk and Recorder's Office, who is taking notes and recording this public meeting, and Frank Haug from our County Attorney's Office as well. So one thing I wanted to mention before I turn it over to our Community Development Director, if you look at the agenda, I've decided to switch it up a bit, and rather than, the first item will be the consent agenda item, and I will explain about that in a moment, but please note that we are switching the order. The tabled item will go second, and the consent agenda item will go first. With that in mind, folks, Rebecca, please introduce your colleagues and help us with the procedure.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Everett, Community Development Director for Larimer County. Up at the table with me today are Justin Curry, one of our planners, Michael Whitley, one of our senior planners, and Connor Sheldon with the Engineering Department. And we have other staff in the room on hand if needed for specific items. We respectfully request that all members of the audience please silence your electronic devices and please help yourself to a copy of the agenda and hearing procedure instructions, which are to the right of the door here. Please wait to speak until you are recognized by the chair, and if you are next to speak, please quietly make your way to the front of the room to save time. We ask that everyone maintain civility, refraining from any audience applause, comments, or disruptions. Please make your comments directly to the Board of County Commissioners from the podium here. And we do have a portable microphone and assisted listening devices available if that is needed. When you are speaking, please state your name at the beginning of your comments and provide the spelling of your name if it's unique. And please speak directly toward the microphone and into the microphone so that all participants may hear. For those who are participating over Zoom, you will be muted until you are recognized by the chair. And if you wish to speak on a specific item or request that a consent agenda item be moved to the discussion agenda, please use the raise hand function at the appropriate time. That concludes my overview of the procedures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So, colleagues, friends, at this time, what I'll do is go through the agenda very quickly, and then I'll say a little bit more about consent agenda, which will be the first item that we'll consider. So the consent agenda is with regards to the Lucky 3 Ranch Appeals file number 23-Zone 3542, and this is in regards to accessory living areas. That is the consent agenda item. The tabled item, which is item 2, from the is something from March 25th, 2024 land use hearing agenda. This is in regards to the Lemon Family Trust Conservation Development, file number 22-Land 4255. And then the public hearing discussion items that are listed on the back of the agenda include 2 appeals from the Crown Castle regarding an administrative denial of case 23-WCF0105, file number 24-GNRL0550, and appeal of the administrative denial similar. This is 106, file number 24-GNRL0551. And these are regarding an appeal by the decision of the Community Development Director to deny these small cell facilities, and we'll get into that. So let me just say a thing about the consent agenda. As was mentioned, So things that are on the consent agenda are typically administrative, routine in nature. We are not aware of any particular controversy, and so there's not a full discussion on that particular item unless any of us wishes to pull the item off the consent agenda for a discussion, or if somebody from the public wishes to do the same. So a consent agenda, unless it's pulled off, a consent agenda item, unless it's pulled off, will be voted upon with the proper motion without any full discussion. With that in mind, colleagues, do you wish to remove the single item consent agenda item? All right. Is there anyone here in person in the audience that wishes to remove the Lucky Three Ranch Appeals file number 23 zone 3542? Rebecca, is there anyone online perhaps?
There are no hands raised online to remove that item
All
from
righty.
consent.
Then we'll keep that on the consent agenda, and I will ask, let's see, Commissioner Stevens, would you offer the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move to approve the item on the consent agenda, subject to the conditions in the staff reports, and further move to authorize the chair to sign the findings and resolutions.
Thank you, Commissioner. That is a proper motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 That passes 3-0. So we have now completed the consent agenda item. The next item on our agenda for today, so if you're here for that, you're done, and you should be happy about that. The next item is the tabled item from the March 25th, 2024 hearing. And at this point in that particular hearing process, we are in the deliberation phase, which means that we've gone through a full hearing. The applicant has presented, well, staff has presented, the applicant has presented. There has been extensive public comment, both written and verbal, et cetera. There have been rebuttals, and for various reasons, we moved 2 weeks ago to continue that particular hearing to today. So at this time, we will not be hearing public comment nor from the applicant, but we do have an opportunity before we go into deliberation to ask any questions of staff. Do either of my colleagues have any questions of staff? Or for that matter, perhaps the applicant? Yes, Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I have a question, and we may have asked this last time, but it's been a minute, and I did try to take really good notes. But can you remind me, do we have something in the land use on wetland protection? Is that 100 feet from a wetland or riparian area or waterway?
That is correct. It is 100 feet from any wetlands or riparian areas.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question. Thank you. And this meets that. That's correct. Okay.
Correct. Yes, and it's shown on the plat.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shadrack McNally, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do, sir. May I?
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Curry, I don't know if you can pull up that site plan. Are you ready to pull up the site? But it has where the trail was going to be and the other locations. And maybe the one with where the colored one. If it states in the land use code 100 feet, that's the minimum, right? It doesn't say it can't be more or have different conditions on it, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is the minimum distance. And so, yeah, there's not a maximum included on that, but that is the minimum requirement.
And if I might, Mr. Chair, thank you for that. Even though the building envelope on the other two larger parcels is prescribed, you stated agricultural buildings or structures could be built anywhere on the property. Do they still have to keep those agricultural items or buildings out of the riparian area and floodplain?
Yes. Yes, if those residual parcels with the building envelopes on there, if they are used or for agricultural purposes, agricultural structures allowed to be on the property outside of the building envelope, but they will have to maintain any other setbacks for zoning setbacks and riparian corridors or floodways and things like that, floodplain.
And according to the application, Mr. Curry, can you tell me the proposed park or trails that went right up to the edge of the riparian area or kind of into the riparian area? Could you pull that map up just so I could see that again? The colored one. Sorry. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the current one. Yes, thank you. Great. And so the brown line, could you show with your cursor where that's the riparian level?
Sorry, those are the trails, and then the brown.
Okay, that's the boundary.
Yes.
Can
So
you
the boundary and then the setback would be this dashed line here.
So that's into the riparian okay. And so for some reason, the open space is allowed into the riparian area?
So those setbacks apply to structures and not, I guess, a land use designation or the open space. So open space can be within the wetland setback. Just that applies to the structures or buildings.
Okay. I think, and we can apply other conditions, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Anything else?
No, Mr. Chair, I appreciate allowing me that time. Thank you.
Okay, I have one quick question. I seem to recall that that the Planning Commission added a condition of approval at their February 21st Planning Commission regarding a trail easement to try to potentially look at a trail that would connect with the North Front Range MPO Regional Active Trail System. And I think upon further review, apparently that system is well north of this particular proposed development, and therefore is that condition of approval no longer necessary?
That is correct, and I brought up the map to illustrate that, but yeah, that condition is no longer required in this case.
Thank you. Thanks, Justin. I believe I don't have any other questions, so I think now we can go into our deliberation and ultimately a final decision as best as we can. With that, let's see, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, are you ready to start us off?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate everyone being here today and here in the last meeting and having such really robust public comment and a lot of information. And I'm thankful that this development has at least the conservation easement development applied to it. So a lot of this is set aside as open space, but also it is very prudent, in my opinion, because it is a known area from the 2013 floods and how extensive that flooding was, and I know that area had a lot of damage. I saw it. I live west of Loveland, so I used a lot of those back roads to get around, and so I am concerned about still the having folks or things near the riparian area and in that flood area. That's my question about the agricultural structures, because if you can build structures in that, hopefully not in the floodplain, I still have concerns about that, and I know it took a while for that area to recover. I still have a lot of concerns about the riparian area and having those trails and that open space into the riparian area and near the river. We all know that even with signs and having folks being careful, having their pets or people coming and chasing wildlife or being in that area is really critical. So I have a lot of concerns about the riparian area and kind of the disruption for the wildlife that are in there. And I know they say there could be potential wetlands. I'm sure there are wetlands there. It's a riparian area, and that only 1% of the Colorado landscape is riparian area. We've lost over half of our wetlands since the beginning of our statehood, and these are areas that we can't get back once they're developed. And I have a lot of concerns about that. And I do believe there are wetlands there, and they need to be helped to be protected and preserved. I am glad that it's at least larger lots and smaller homes, but my biggest concern is of the riparian area. So I'd like to see maybe that open space be bumped back a little bit and not have the trails right up against the river, because I do believe that people will end up going down there anyway, even if there's signs and there's obviously there's the lot lines. So I'm still concerned about the riparian area and doing what we can to protect that. So I'd like to see some further protections put in place as conditions if we do approve this, to further protect that open space and riparian area for that area.
Do you have a specific suggestion, Commissioner?
Yeah, I'd like to see that slide up there and showing the trails in the open space. I'd like to maybe, have that riparian area line go to 150 feet and back, have those trails. I don't think you should do a fence, because the wildlife and the birds, and this is more than just, elk and deer and bald eagles and all that. This is the birds and the bees and all those things. There is a lot of folks, there's very active beekeepers in that area, in that region, and I just want to make sure that anything, if this is approved, that would be. And I think when we start putting trails down there and closer to the river and stuff, that's just inviting activity, and so I would want to see maybe that more protected. But at least I feel, sometimes we can't stop developments, but at least we can put as many protections in there to protect our areas and our wildlife, and try to have them mitigate as much impact on the environment, especially these critical landscapes in our agriculture areas as possible. That's what I would say, Commissioner. Thank you.
Commissioners, may I ask a clarifying question? Or Commissioner Shattuck McNally, is your concern primarily with the trails and recreational activities that are happening within that 100-foot wetland buffer, or are you concerned about the setback of the lots and any buildings being greater than 100 feet from that wetland? Just to clarify what the intent, if that intent is the recreational facilities or to increase the setback for the lots themselves.
I guess my concern is, I think that one lot is actually beyond the line there that I can see, that lot that's there. But it's the rest of the open space and the recreational activities. I'm just without a fence there and lots of other things, and I don't think there should be a fence there, because that would further bring impacts to that area. I feel like that needs to be further restricted or protected, so that folks can understand how important protecting the 1% of our Colorado landscapes that supports 80 to 90% of our wildlife species in the state of Colorado.
Rebecca, did that provide a clarification, or do we still have some questions about the intent?
I think we would just want to understand if that condition to increase the distance to 150 feet, if that is intended to affect buildings, or if it's intended to exclude trails within that area, or what the goal is there, so that we can help with any wording if needed.
Maybe this will help, and I appreciate that. And that is, and Justin, if you could speak to this, it was referenced earlier in the land use code. It does state 100-foot setback from riparian or wetlands areas. And what does that exactly mean?
That's correct. That's, yeah, and per the wetland delineation report, our environmental planner reviewed it and agreed that, yeah, and that required the 100-foot setback from riparian areas, and that's for structures and buildings.
And that applies to structures?
Buildings, yes.
So the lots that are on the north end of the proposed residential development there, are those set back properly based on that requirement? Are they?
Yes, if you look on the map here, this
Thank you.
dashed brown line is that wetland setback, and then here, is lot 1, they're outside of that area.
And they're
So all
100 feet back?
So all the structures are outside of this boundary,
The
yes.
100 foot?
Yes.
And are you suggesting, Commissioner, that that should be increased to 150 feet?
For the recreational areas and I know there's that lot there, and you're saying that's above 100 feet, but that would not allow, you could put a restriction on that building envelope so that their structures are not near the riparian area, correct? In that building envelope?
They would be outside of the riparian buffer.
Okay.
So the riparian area is, this is the boundary line, I believe. Let me look at the legend again, sorry. So the solid brown line is the riparian area boundary that was determined during the delineation, or part of the delineation report that we required. And our environmental staff reviewed it and agreed that that is the boundary. And this boundary, this dashed line, is the buffer from that boundary line.
That's 100 feet from the brown
Correct.
line to the solid line. Okay.
Thank you. And before we continue with your deliberation, it seems appropriate that we should ask the applicant to come up and make sure we're all on the same page of what is being asked and what the implications of that might be. I think that's appropriate.
Sure. Hi, I'm Alex Hoyme with HT Land Partners. And
Welcome, Alex. Welcome, Mr. Harney.
all right, I appreciate that. Thank you for hearing us again today. I do, and I'm glad you asked me to come up and provide some feedback on what's being requested here. I guess our intention of placing the trail, and yes, that trail does come into the riparian area, is to, I guess, focus the any community member that does want to, or that has the curiosity to move towards the river. We want to have that focused area instead of just people jumping the fence and heading towards the river. And so that was our intention of the trail, was to limit the area that was passed through in that area. And we're even thinking of taking it a step back from disturbance and maybe just delineating a path with some larger cobbles, so that we don't go in there and place any trail material. It's a very sandy area down there anyway, and so maybe limiting it to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't mean to get too involved here, but trying to be helpful.
Sure.
So as I look at the map, and that's helpful, it's blown up, it looks like the trail, as proposed, is within that 100-foot setback.
Yeah, and that is a structure setback, and so that's the intention of that setback, as far as I understand. Correct, Mr. Curry?
And is what you're asking is that that trail and perhaps the structure, it be pushed back another 50 feet? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I just feel like when you're walking all the way down the river and everyone's going to have their dogs, I just would like to have that pushed back and have further protections for the riparian area, because I knew this went into that zone, and I just feel that does not make me comfortable.
So, Alex, what do you say to that? Is that
I guess the main thing that it would impact is we have a pavilion structure that's just outside of that riparian area. And I'm very familiar with the property. I've been down there a significant amount weekly, if sometimes daily. The area where that is placed is well beyond the, there's an open field there. Actually, there's bunch of cattle that currently hang out around that area. And it is, you can see the trees up on the north side of the image there. Those are some large mature cottonwoods. And then there's basically it's an open field between that and the that 100-foot buffer. And so what that does is, or it does create quite a buffer. And I guess what we would propose if this were to be implemented is likely shift that structure off to the west, kind of in that turf area, or over there where we could still provide that community amenity. And so if it's just a structure setback, that is something that we could modify to adhere to that 150 feet. I don't know if it's really going to make a significant impact. It'll be in a wide open area of a field in one area versus the other. We had it more centralized.
What about the trail? Can you adjust that, or how does that work?
We can, if you would like us to remove the trail that goes through there, we will make that work. We felt it was a benefit to kind of, like I say, focus the access area to just one place instead of a bunch of people jumping a fence or just heading into there randomly through paths. So that was the intent behind the trail.
I'll make one last comment and then turn it back over to you, Commissioner Shaddock McNally. And that is, certainly we did hear quite a bit of public comment about minimizing the access anywhere near where the Little Thompson flows and the riparian wetlands areas and all the wildlife. So it seems to speak to that. But at the same time, I'm hearing you say that there could be some unintended consequences of perhaps making that adjustment. So with all that in mind, Commissioner, how would you like to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I still would like to see that setback 150 feet and then that one, at least the trail retracted back away from the river at the top, that one that goes right along the property line. There, at least I'd like to have that one at least moved a little bit, maybe redone so it's not right close, because I can see people just going right down into the river, and it's in the riparian area, so it just means there's going to be interaction. So I don't know exactly how that could be redrawn, but I'd like to have that away from the property, the river, and so that would make me feel comfortable. I just think that's a major impact that we can't recover from ever. So thank you.
Back to you, sir.
And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we have or we can remove the trail system from that point, and as long as the staff is good with that, we can pull our trail out of there.
So that means that would be adjusting the site plan. Is that's doable, right?
Yeah, it would be adjusting these design plans here and the construction plans and things like that to exclude or modify the trail network.
Okay. Does that help, Commissioner? I hope I was helpful and not complicated.
No, you were, and thank you for asking the applicant up. And then also, I just want to clarify once again that the agricultural structures will have to be out of the area too. So
That is correct.
Okay.
Any structure has to apply to all underlying zoning and floodway, riparian, or wetland setbacks.
thank you.
Okay, so Alex, hope it's okay calling you by your first name.
Sure.
Thank you for helping us to navigate that. Why don't you head on back and get some more steps? We may call you back, you never know. Commissioner, with that in mind, would you like to continue with your deliberation?
I think I'm done, sir. I want to give more time for, as you know, I'm in a time thing today, so I want to just honor letting my colleagues have a chance to talk. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Stevens, that suggests that you're on.
Okay. So I also want to thank all the people that came out the other night to talk about this, some of the impacts that you might see. And so we definitely heard all those impacts. Hopefully we got some of the questions answered for people. I know there were questions about the ditches, and it sounded like Alex was, understood that there's ditch rights and that people need to, might need to make improvements on ditches. Some concerns about traffic. I don't know that we'll be able to address that here, but it's certainly something that, I have notes on. And so as we, kind of look to the future on that road, As I said before, we can't really do anything about bike traffic. We can't, necessarily impede bike traffic. They, can go on roads too. So, but certainly we could look at safety items, not in this item, but in the future. We had also addressed the septics system, which Leah had addressed, and they will be working on a septic system that works because of the higher groundwater there. I just wanted to make sure that we know that folks were listening to all the things that we said. It looks like that there's some repairs that need to happen with the head gate for Eagle Ditch. And so hopefully that's something that potentially the applicant can work with the residents on that as well. So yeah, and then there were obviously questions that Commissioner Shattuck McNally addressed about the riparian areas and the wetland areas. And so my inclination is to support this development because it is allowed in the type of zoning. And I think that Alex has been very thoughtful about working with the neighbors that he needed to work with to make sure that he was answering all the questions and mitigating for any potential problems. I will say that we did sort of, by having just a 500 feet notice, we did exclude some surrounding properties that are adjacent to this property, and that is unfortunate. And so there again, that's something where we need to look at our own policies to correct that. But I trust that Alex would have those conversations with some of the neighboring farms and ranches there, that just to make sure that we've dotted all our I's and crossed all our T's to make sure that we're talking to those neighbors. I see him nodding his head. So I am going to support this. I might need a little more clarification, because I'm happy to support some of the things that Commissioner Shattuck McNally was talking about. One of the questions I had is, Alex talked about delineating a path with boulders versus creating, bringing in materials and creating a path. And I'm wondering, are there concerns with sort of some social paths being created where it might be better to have delineated paths? I don't know which way to go. I don't know what would protect the areas better. So I'm wondering if staff has any thoughts on that.
I would say there are some concerns of just some wildcat paths, like as the applicant has mentioned, that people like animals are drawn to the water, and so I imagine they'll be going through there and finding their way. But yeah, it's not really technical. I don't know if our staff has comments.
I can speak just really generally as it relates to kind of trail design best practices, and I'm not a trail designer, but I think it really depends on the level of foot traffic that you have, and the more activity you expect in an area, the more focused and kind of delineated you want those facilities to be. If you're in, for example, in more of a wilderness area, there often are not delineated trails in quite the same way, because the foot traffic is expected to be more dispersed. So in a more suburban or urbanizing environment, having something to delineate the trails does help to minimize social trails.
Okay, that's one of the things that so we can ponder that a little bit more. But and then the 150 foot buffer form. So does that mean that as things were laid out, that any of those building envelopes would need to move, or are we just talking about the one structure that Alex was talking about that was looked like a gazebo kind of structure? Because that's what you were intending, right? 150 foot from the building, not just 100 feet.
Without having this scaled and stuff like that, just kind of observation. There's that current buffer line right there. There's the lot, and so obviously 50 feet would probably leak it, come into there a little bit, but it may not exceed much more than what the underlying zoning setbacks would be.
Okay.
And if you look along here, and as the applicant mentioned, there's a gazebo type structure here that's just outside of that buffer, so that would, like you mentioned, have to be moved somewhere.
Okay.
And then I don't know if the applicant has more comments, because he's more familiar with the lot layout than I would be.
I'm comfortable with that suggestion as well. I don't know if we want to think about the path, if we think that social trails might be more damaging to this area than delineating the path with some boulders and some sort of a natural, what I would think is more of a natural trail and not sort of building a trail. But so I'll support the application with a 150-foot buffer for the structures, as Commissioner Shattuck McNally said, and then just wanted to have further conversation about whether it makes sense to have the no paths or a path delineated with boulders.
Commissioner Stevens, I think anytime you start to have a delineated path or that path that's on that zone that's right up against the line, you're kind of encouraging folks. Even in Rocky National Park, even though there's a delineated path and there's lots of people, there's still social trails going all the time. And so I think anytime we can pull that main path that's going along the bottom there, I'd like to have that one moved up quite a bit. And yes, I think delineating the path and maybe having, hopefully in their HOA, they're very, very clear about protecting the wildlife in the riparian area and understanding how to maybe not have the dogs running up and down the riparian area and being really good stewards of that area, because it is very critical habitat that's eroding out of our state. So I think that there's a lot of science between social trails and stuff, and as someone who understands, been hiking and seeing those grow and change, and I think that it is sometimes really important for the stewards of the area that they just have to be able to understand the importance of following those kinds of setbacks. So I think that one trail that goes along the line there next to the river, I'd just like to have that pulled back, and I still think you could have a loop there, but it'd have to be a smaller loop. So.
And then Commissioner, just one for clarification. So you're saying not pulling back all the trails, but that particular section that's close to the water. And then would you be more comfortable with having the path delineated with boulders versus bringing in materials and sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that
Thank you.
there's a good chance that, when there's flooding, it's going to probably have trail erosion anyway. And so I don't know what kind of setup they're going to have for, knowing about trail maintenance and stuff. It's probably better to have it more natural at this point. So.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I can definitely support that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think I'll go next. And I actually, I've given this a lot of thought, and I've prepared a bit of a statement, and I'll try to abbreviate it in light of the time. So please bear with me. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for your patience and for allowing us more time to carefully read and process all the information regarding the proposed Lemon Family Trust Conservation Development, including the staff report, slide presentation, referring agency attachments, the applicant's information and site plans, and all the public comment opposed and supportive. I certainly have a much better understanding of the project and have decided to support this application with the conditions of approval that are in the staff report and the one discussed today for the following reasons. Regarding the various criteria, the general review approval criteria, the preliminary plat criteria, the development standards in Article 4, relevant criteria. We have Article 5 subdivision standards. It is my opinion that based on review of all the information and the input, that these land use code requirements have been met or certainly will be addressed with regard to the conditions of approval. That's my first reason. This is a preliminary plat approval that we would be considering, and as I understand it, the final plat is an administrative matter which is reviewed by and approved by all of the relevant departments and agencies, including engineering and others, public health and so forth. And then ultimately, that final plat would go to an administrative matters meeting agenda, and then if approved there, then it would be allowed for signatures would be authorized. I also want to note that the Planning Commission, which convened on this matter on February 24th, after deliberation and discussion, they approved this application with conditions 8-0 on February 21st. And again, just as a reminder, given that this property is more than 30 acres outside of a growth management area It needs to be a conservation development, and that's what is before us today, preliminary plat. I think that the acres are 241, but because some of those will go for right-of-way, some of those are not developable because of the floodplain in the river. Ultimately, we're looking at 209 acres, and that's being split 50-50 between the residual lots that are on 35 acres with a 2-acre building envelope, and then, of course, the proposed clustered residential development. Regarding the public comments, concerns, it is my opinion that those have been addressed or will be addressed as we go through the finalizing of the plat. It was pointed out earlier that some folks expressed concerns about the lack of notification, and we do have that rule in the land use code that we've talked about updating, and I believe that's on our agenda. But we typically will notify folks within a 500-foot radius. In certain rural areas, that's probably not the best way to go. So we will be looking to change that. On the matter of the increased traffic, in road safety, as I read through the material, the traffic impact study, and that will need to be updated based on the issues from the engineering department. As I understand, the level of service in the morning, that level of service is what's called free flow, low volumes, and no delay. In the afternoon, when people are coming home from work, that is a level of service B, which is stable flow, and speeds can be restricted. So there seems to be more traffic in the afternoon than in the morning. And as I understand that, this is with regard to full build out of the project. And it's important to note that it's a phased development. Regarding all the matters with wetlands, wildlife, water, smart growth, bicycle lanes, the issue of shallow groundwater and the types of septic systems that would be appropriate. I believe all those issues will be addressed, and I think ongoing community involvement is critical. And regarding the preserving of the rural character and agricultural land, I mean, that's the essence of a conservation development. So with all of that said, I will support this application with the conditions of approval that are in the report and also what has been stated. Thank you. Oh, you're on.
I'm just ready. Are we ready to vote, Mr. Chair?
Yes, let's see.
May I interrupt prior to a motion?
Absolutely,
To
please.
the extent that the condition may involve boulders in the floodplain, we just want to make sure that it's clear in the condition that you state that there be flexibility in the design of the trail to accommodate floodplain restrictions.
I think that's
wise.
I would say that's wise.
Well, and I just wanted to clarify what the condition is going to be. Maybe, if we're going to put a finer point on it, it sounds like what Commissioner Shattuck McNally, you're saying is that you want any structure to be at least 150 feet away from the riparian area, and that would include a trail.
That would be my best. That would be my on both sides. That would be my wish. And I think that the trail material should be thoughtful and flexible for flood conditions. So yes, but I know they're trying to have some people get down there and have that structure. So I would like to at least bare minimum pull that trail that goes right along the property line to the north as far away as we can away from the property and the river. But that would like to have it, I would like to, but that would pretty much now allow any trail in that open space.
Well, and that's why I want to clarify, because there's sort of a couple of different things. One is there's building restrictions, but that's really, some of that has to do with FEMA and floodplain regulations, and then there's building code regulations, which are sort of a separate deal. But it sounds like what you're saying is just any structures in that open area need to be at least 150 feet away from the riparian boundary, and that structures would include trails. And then secondarily, that any trails need to be designed to take account of flood risk.
When you say any structures, does that mean buildings as well?
Yes.
And I guess I'd like to understand what the implications of that are, because there are a couple of those cluster development residential lots that are kind of close to all of that. Uh, Justin, can you help us with this, or do we need to help the applicant get some more steps, perhaps?
I think Justin can clarify that.
Thank you.
So with what we discussed here for this proposal for the 150 foot, that would essentially, this dashed line here, this brown dashed line, that would basically exclude all trails from this area, because that 150 foot, if you look, oops, sorry. And, runs along here, essentially exclude mostly, if not all, the trails that we have that are currently shown from that open space area. And then also, like the applicant mentioned, this proposed, structure, gazebo type structure would need to be moved more than likely to the west somewhere. So that could still be there, but a lot of the trails would be gone if that 150 foot buffer from the riparian boundary or the wetland boundary includes trails, not just buildings or structures.
And then it appears that there's one lot that could be affected, but it would be just kind of the back corner of that lot. It's unlikely a building would be placed there anyway, but that would restrict any sheds or other buildings in that area as well.
And
so probably a minimal impact to that lot, but it would affect that.
And then it would, obviously here possibly cut off a connection point to any trails, and just essentially the trail network would die here, and it wouldn't be a loop type system, or it'd be more difficult to design one, I suppose.
So I'll offer, in the interest of trying to be as clear as we can be, I'm hearing right now trails and structures, including the kiosk thing, as well as possibly the corner of that particular building envelope of one of the residentials. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
Yes, that buffer would potentially affect all those things mentioned.
Is that your understanding, Commissioner? And again, I just need to put out there, I think it was stated earlier that if we take out most of these trails, will that provide an incentive for social trails, people that kind of just bushwhack on over, to the river and all of that? I mean, you know these things well. Any thoughts on that, Commissioner? And how
Well,
can we?
I think no matter what we do, unless the homeowners association and the developer makes it very clear about the negative impacts, it's going to, no matter what happens, there's going to be a trouble. So my biggest concern is, I mean, yeah, I see some that's in the zone, but this one trail, that one part at the very top is inside the riparian area. I'd like to pull all that back and have a trail. I'm sure they could design a little bit just to go along and stay out of the riparian area, but at least maybe, the setback could still be a little bit in the setback, but then move that building over or.
So may I suggest then that perhaps the condition of approval should have some statement about flexibility. In other words, the intent here is that top trail is to be, is to realign that trail so it's a little bit back from that line, so that the condition of approval would apply to structures, including the kiosk and that one particular lot. And then I don't think we're not trail designers, then work on that trail, adjusting it.
So just I'm trying to understand, so maybe having increasing the riparian or the wetland setback from 100 feet to 150 feet for buildings and structures, and then removing the trail network out of the riparian area or the wetland area. Would that satisfy Shaq Benally?
Yes.
Then the applicant is also here to, maybe he can comment as well about HOA or developer stuff or items.
Yeah. And then I think with that, we're also hearing a comment about trail design too, designing the trail in a way that is kind of more natural in nature, but also complies with any floodplain regulations.
Okay. Then I'll ask you to offer the motion.
Okay, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I move that the Board of County Commissioners approve the Lemon Family Trust Conservation Development File Number 22-LAND 4255, subject to the conditions as outlined in the staff report and including increasing or changing and increasing the riparian area setback to 150 feet and requiring that the trails, whatever trails are built, that they are built with flexible materials that have flood mitigation and flood natural materials in mind and flood damage to ask to have clear things in the HOA about wildlife interactions and protection of wildlife, and to remove that part of the trail that is actually in the riparian area and move that part of the trail back in, out of riparian area, but, and I think that would be it, sir.
Yeah, I think the 100, just to kind of clarify that, I don't think anybody captured that. The 150-foot setback applies to structures. And then the other part of the condition, if it's acceptable, and I don't know about getting into HOAs and covenants and all of that, but the other part of it would be to design the trail in such a way to minimize, impact on the riparian and protecting and minimizing the riparian area, the wetlands. No.
And maybe just to clarify, so if it sounds like what you're saying is there won't be any trails in the riparian area anyway, right? So, I mean, if they're gonna be outside the riparian area, I don't know if they're in the floodway or the floodplain are they?
Yes.
So then, I mean, you could say no trails within the riparian area, and no structures within 150 feet of the riparian area. Well, the boundary, yeah, the riparian boundary. There's the riparian area, and then there's a 100-foot setback. You're asking for that to be 150 feet.
And no trail in the riparian area.
Right. Within that 100-foot setback of the.
150 setback is structures and trail materials, and then no trail in the riparian area. Those are two different lines, riparian area and the riparian area setback.
Okay.
So that one trail is in the riparian area, and then
Right.
the other one is the riparian setback. So taking the trail out of the riparian area and then having 150-foot riparian setback for structures.
And that makes sense to me. As far as okay, so I think that we're clear on. As far as the HOA stuff, I think
I'll withdraw that.
Okay.
So before we vote, Mr. Assistant County Attorney, since it's so clear to you, could you restate the condition of approval as you understand it before we vote?
The condition of approval would say that there shall be no structures built within 150 feet of the riparian area. So it has to be outside of the riparian boundary will be 150 feet, and there will be no structures built within that 150 feet. And the part of the trail that is within the riparian boundary must be built outside of the riparian area. So no trail within the riparian area.
And I would just, maybe, looking at the map, we're referring to open space A, because there is a common open space that going down the middle of the development. So we're referring to open space A. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can we put that in the condition of approval?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think we have yeah, Commissioner please.
And Commissioner Shanahan, what your intent with the HOA thing was to have people not interact with wildlife?
Yeah, just to understand that they shouldn't let their dogs chase after wildlife and just just kind of just putting that in to be mindful of not allowing, trying to interact or allow their animals or dogs to chase wildlife, so.
Could we require a sign that said something like that as you enter that area? What if we did that, Commissioner, instead?
I would love that.
Okay. That's then everybody sees it, because you might not look
So
at
that would be amending the condition to require signage in open space A about keeping pets on leashes or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be good. And that way they.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. All right, then, I believe we have a motion on the table referring to the conditions of approval that are in the report and the condition of approval that I believe we've just concluded, which pertains to 150-foot setback from the riparian for structures, no trails in open space A, and signage to ensure that pets and things of that nature are. Yes, Rebecca?
I understood the second portion of that condition to be no trails within the limits of the riparian area. So there could be trails within the remainder of open space A as long as they're outside of the riparian area itself.
Okay.
Is that
Okay.
accurate?
Okay, with that clarification, I think we have it, folks. Thank you all for the discussion. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So this conservation development application is approved, and thank you all for your patience. We'll now move on to the public hearing discussion items. The two Crown Castle appeals regarding small cell wireless communications facilities. And I believe Michael will present the staff report, the staff presentation, and I think we're going to combine those two. They're two different locations. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct. And again, I think Frank had something to say.
I apologize. There are two separate applications and they're two different sites. So I think to the extent, Michael, I think has one presentation, but we got to hear him. I know the applicant has two separate sites, and so we need to keep those separate somehow.
Does that suggest, Frank, thank you, obviously separate motions, but are you saying separate presentations?
Well, the technical information is going to be different. And so the standards will be the same, the code provisions will be the same, but they're two separate spots. And so the analysis of those things has to be done on an individual basis.
Okay. And very quickly, folks, democracy can be a little bit bumpy sometimes, trying to involve people. But so there will be a staff presentation. Michael, our planner, we will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff regarding what has been presented, what's in our packet. Then, as in any other land use hearing full discussion item, we would go to the applicants. In this case, it's an appeal to an administrative decision, but we would go to the applicants. The applicants would have an opportunity to make their case. And then we would open it up to public comment. Then the applicant would have an opportunity to respond to that public comment. And also, we would have an opportunity to ask questions of staff in regard to what, the applicant has stated as the basis for their appeal. Frank, can you help us out here?
I think that makes sense. I guess my suggestion would be to have Michael do his presentation.
Right.
Have the applicant do their presentation on the first one, do the public comment on the first one, because it's two different neighbor or groups too. So do one, have Michael do his presentation, applicant presentation, public comment, do the normal process. And then when the second one comes up, you've already seen Michael's presentation. So he can just, if he has anything to add, he can. Otherwise, you can just move into the applicant and public comment for that one.
So the applicant presentation and the public comment would be separated out. And we would, of course, have an opportunity to ask questions. Okay, thank you, Frank. That makes sense. So with all that, Michael, if you would identify yourself once again, we may have forgotten by now, and please proceed.
Yes, good afternoon. Again, I'm Michael Whitley, Senior Planner with the Larimer County Planning Staff. And as Frank mentioned, I am going to be making one presentation for the two applications. So the two applications are two appeals to two separate administrative determinations. They are related, and they're very close together in terms of geographic space. So you'll see that it kind of makes sense to do one presentation. And as Frank mentioned, also there would be the opportunity for neighbors from both neighborhoods to provide comment. And there would be two separate motions, two separate votes. So the two applications are 24 GNRL 0550, which is the Crown Castle appeal to the administrative denial of case 23 WCF 0105. That is an appeal to the decision of the Community Development Director to deny case 23 WCF 0105, which was a supplemental site license request to construct a small cell wireless communication facility within the public right-of-way on the south side of West County Road 38E, approximately 380 feet east of the intersection of Wyndham Street and West County Road 38E. So I do have a vicinity map that shows the two applications. And so the first application, WCF, or 23 WCF 0105, is located here on the edge of the Taft Canyon neighborhood. The second application is 24 GNRL 0551. That is the Crown Castle appeal to the administrative denial of case 23 WCF 0106. And that parcel or location in the right-of-way is located here within the Springfield neighborhood. The request is an appeal to the decision of the Community Development Director to deny case number 23 WCF 0106, which was a supplemental site license request to construct a small cell wireless facility within the public right-of-way on the northwest corner of the intersection of Meade Street and Dalton Drive. The applicant or the applicants on both cases are Matthew Doran, Meredith Marshall, and Nicole Russell, all of Crown Castle Fiber LLC. By way of background, so a wireless communication facility master license agreement between Crown Castle LLC and Larimer County was approved by the Board of County Commissioners on March 8th of 2022. That master license agreement is an agreement to allow Crown Castle to construct and operate approximately 16 small cell wireless communication facilities, which consist of poles and associated equipment within the U.S. Highway 36 public right-of-way between the Larimer County line and the town of Estes Park town limits. The master license agreement specifies requirements and permissions regarding permits, construction, operation, and maintenance of small wireless communication facilities in the public right-of-way. And the master license agreement also contains a requirement for the approval of supplemental site licenses prior to the construction of any one of those facilities. So again, that was proposed to be approximately 16 as written in the master license agreement. The purpose of the supplemental site license is to allow for public notice and review of specific proposed locations of each small wireless communication facility. So 17 small cell wireless facilities were approved in the U.S. Highway 36 right-of-way through supplemental site licenses in June of 2022. The first amendment to the master license agreement was approved by the Board of County Commissioners on May 16th of 2023. That amendment covers this subject area, so it expanded the geographic area covered by the master license agreement to the vicinity of the intersection of South Taft Hill Road and West County Road 38E to allow for the construction of up to 4 small cell facilities in that area. So again, that intersection is this intersection here. So the idea is that there would be up to 4 small cell facilities in this vicinity to complement the network that's being developed within the town of the city of Fort Collins. So as with all small facilities, each facility is subject to approval through a supplemental site license. The amended master license agreement can be found as attachment B in each of the staff reports. So Crown Castle did apply for the subject to supplemental site licenses for the construction of small cell facilities in this area. Again, south side of 38E and the corner of Dalton Drive and Meade Street.
And quickly, just to quickly interrupt, the way the map shows, it shows that second location, Dalton Drive and Meade Street, that actually should read 106. Isn't that correct?
Oh, yes, actually, I'm sorry. I didn't notice that. Yes, you were right. I copied the label but failed to change the number.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that catch. So to give you a little bit of a different perspective on the neighborhoods, so both of these applications are within or on the edge of neighborhoods. There is a manufactured home community to the south of the northern facility. It's to the north of the southern facility. There's also a manufactured home community to the east. So it is a fairly densely populated area. So the applications were reviewed, and I will give you some additional details. So these illustrations are all found within the staff report. There's a more specific location of the southern node relative to right-of-way, relative to property lines. Each of these towers is proposed to be 30 feet tall. So this is an illustration of the tower, and the antennas and associated equipment would be found within the canister at the top of the tower. And this is a photo simulation of the southern facility. I have similar information for the northern facility, so 106. So that is, again, in the public right-of-way, not on private property, but in the public right-of-way on the northwest corner of Meade and Dalton, located right here. That design is slightly different based on staff feedback on the first round of review. It was changed to a design that mimicked a street light. So they have a street light fixture at the top of this tower. This tower is just slightly under 30 feet. So rounded up to 30 feet. It is just under that. This illustration shows that proposed tower relative to the nearest home on the northwest corner of that intersection. And then here's a photo simulation of that same facility. Now, we don't have a similar illustration that shows it relative to the home for the southern facility because it's not really as close to a home. And there was a little bit more concern about the location relative to a specific home on this application. So, on December 21st, 2023, the Community Development Director did write a letter denying both applications based on non-compliance with the standards. And I normally wouldn't put kind of a complete letter in a presentation, but I wanted to stick as closely to the language for the denial as possible because that's what's being considered, the reasoning for the denial. So there are specific reasons listed for each of the applications. WCF 0105 is the node that is on the south side, so in the 38E right-of-way, County Road 38E right-of-way, adjacent to 2404 Idledale. So there is a land use code standard that says wireless communication facilities should be located at least 250 feet away from residential structures, unless it's demonstrated that it's not technically feasible to locate within closer than 250 feet. And when it is placed near residential properties, it should be placed such that it minimizes visual impacts equitably among adjacent properties. So in the findings of the director, there's a statement that no maps or documentation were provided to show the boundaries of the search ring to understand the extent of potential alternative locations. And again, what you want to view, what you want is placement that has the least visual impact. There's also a statement that there was no consultation with adjacent neighbors or property owners, which, kind of would possibly inform the visual impacts of a proposed location. And there could be, kind of preferences that are expressed as a part of a conversation with neighbors. There were no alternatives that were proposed, and there was no conversation with the neighbors in terms of between Crown Castle and the adjacent neighbors. There was also a concern that the pole may be located within 5 feet of the right-of-way line or 10 feet from the travelway, whichever is most restrictive. So what that says is basically it needs to be within 10 feet of the road or 5 feet of the right-of-way. And in this case, the right-of-way, and this is the 38E property, is the southern end of the right-of-way. So it needs to be at least 10 feet away from the traveled way or within 5 feet of the southern end of the property line, or excuse me, right-of-way line, whichever is more restrictive. It does not comply with that standard. So for the node that is on Dalton and Meade, and that is WCF 0106, there was a similar consideration with regards to the 250-foot residential, kind of separation, lack of consultation with neighbors. There was also concern that the proposed location could interfere with future curb and ramp improvements on the intersection. And again, both of these illustrations are within the packet, but I've juxtaposed the proposed location with a illustration of a typical road standard within the Fort Collins right-of-way that shows ramps, access, sidewalk, and it does appear that the proposed location would be within the area covered by the sidewalk. So there's several other things within the determination denying the application that we had concerns about. So we found that there was not sufficient information that moving the facility to a less impactful location is technically infeasible. We weren't really given maps or documentation that showed the boundaries of the search ring to understand the extent of the potential alternatives. And again, there was lack of consultation with the surrounding properties. And there are additional details in the letter, which is included in your packet, but also included in entirety within these slides. So, with regards to the Board of County Commissioners' actions, so Section 672B2 contains appeal procedures. And I just highlighted a couple of things. So, the code is specific and it says, at the conclusion of the hearing, the county commissioners will affirm with modifications, or reverse the decision of the administrative officer, and that the decision of the administrative officer will not be reversed unless a preponderance of evidence supports that the decision is in error or inconsistent with the intent and purpose of the code. With that in mind, I came up with 3 options, and these aren't necessarily, kind of all-inclusive. So as you desire to explore alternatives, we can talk about that with consultation with the county attorney staff. But for each application, the Board of County Commissioners may choose to affirm the director's decision to deny the supplemental site license application, affirm with modifications the director's decision to deny the supplemental site license application, or reverse the director's decision to deny the supplemental site license application. And again, with those 3 things in mind, I have 2 suggested motions, or 2 pages with suggested motions, one for each of the applications following that format. But again, should the commissioners decide to come up with an alternative motion, that is certainly within their, kind of authority. That is an overview of the staff report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Commissioner Stevens, do you have any questions for our planner?
I do not have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for our Assistant County Attorney. Can you help us can you please define preponderance of evidence
Well,
and how it applies here?
because this is an appeal that is, you're hearing an appeal from the decision of the director. And so when you talk about a preponderance of the evidence, it essentially means you think that the scales tip slightly in one way or the other. So like, it's not a beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the criminal standard. Clear and convincing evidence means it has to be clear and convincing. Preponderance of the evidence just means the scales are slightly one way or the other. So you'd have to find essentially that the applicant has demonstrated slightly in their favor that the decision that the director made was wrong.
Thank you, Frank.
And actually, I did want to add one thing. So after the staff report was published, we did receive one email and one letter on each application. So there are two different pieces of public comment that were not within the staff report. They were emailed to you as commissioners within a memo on Friday. I also printed out those letters and emails for you for your consideration. Both of those pieces of public comment supported the denial of each application. So there was one of each.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
At this time, I think we can move into the applicant. If you folks want to come up forward, welcome, and present.
Is there a time limit for the,
Oh,
Mr. Chair?
Rebecca, remind me, please. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Typically, I mean, this is an appeal. It's a little bit different.
Yeah,
Thoughts?
typically the board allows for a 15 to 20 minute presentation, but you could ask the applicant how much time they think they need. And
I intend to ask. Thank you. What are your thoughts on how much time you need?
You know, I didn't time it, but I don't think that each one separately would be even 15 minutes.
Okay. Then if you could keep...
I'll keep that in the back of my mind as I go through my comments.
Please do, and welcome. If you would be kind enough to introduce yourself for the record.
Sure. My name is Meredith Marshall. It's Meridith. Marshall is a common spelling. And with me, I have Matthew Doran. He's one of my colleagues from Crown Castle. And he's here because he may be able to answer questions that are more technical that I can't answer.
Oh, yeah, please proceed.
Okay. Will you be handling the slides for me, advancing them?
Oh, yeah, if you could just give me a visual cue.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairperson, Commissioners. Thank you for your time today. The first site that we're going to be discussing is the case number 23 WCF0105, which, as was mentioned by Mr. Whitley, is adjacent to 2404 Idledale Drive. In fact, it's behind it. And this is a view of it, and I'd like you to, in this picture, since this picture won't come back up later, this large tree here is important to note. Okay. Next slide. And this is a view of the proposed site from across the street. This is the old growth tree. And I also want you to note the overhead power lines. Okay. Next. And this is looking down the street, and I want you to also notice the utility poles in this area. And this is in the other direction. You can also see overhead power lines and utility poles. Okay. When we received the denial letter, as Mr. Whitley stated, that the land use code states that wireless communication facilities shall not be within 250 feet of any residential structure unless it is demonstrated that there is no other technically feasible alternative. And so here, this highlighted portion from the land use code there. If these requirements are not reasonably feasible from a construction, engineering, or design perspective, the applicant may submit a written statement to the director requesting the wireless communication facility be exempt from these requirements. Okay. Most small cells generally serve cell phone users within approximately 300 to 1,000 feet from an installation. So as a result, the search ring that we did provide with our application was small, because small wireless facilities are less powerful than the cell phone towers that many people think of. They encompass a small coverage area. And this is in fact a map that was provided with our application. And it shows search rings that were considered, and this center ring here was the intended coverage area. So these are the other alternatives that we considered. As you can see, there's only minimal overlap there, and then this one, there was absolutely no overlap with the coverage area. This green flag right there was the original selected location, which actually lies in the city of Fort Collins. But then after that one was, we were ready to go on it, it was determined by our engineers that in fact was not a suitable location because of overhead power lines. So this, I'm sorry, this is one of the areas we think is one of the first errors, because we did in fact provide maps and boundaries of our search area. And it is small because of the nature of small wireless facilities. So it's important to note what the federal law states with regard to small wireless facilities. The federal law states that coverage maps are not relevant, as small wireless facilities generally address capacity, not just coverage. And under federal law, a provider does not need to show a coverage gap and we did provide RF reports to the county as part of our application process, but it's not just is coverage, it's densification of the network. So that just showing a ring might not necessarily help a decision maker because it's about the number of users within the ring, not just the size of the ring. And again, federal law does not require search rings and maps for that reason. But we did provide, as I said, that one that you saw on the previous slide. And the denial letter stated that the wireless facilities should be located close, as you know, on a power line, on a property line or on a corner. And that Crown Castle only provided a small search ring. Again, as I said earlier, the search ring was small because of the size of the small wireless facility. But we are restricted to where we can place a pole in that search ring because of right-of-way constraints, other utilities, and road setbacks. And we had to take into consideration precautions such as buffers between the right-of-way in case of there's a term for it that's escaping me right now, but a buffer if a car were to go off the road that it wouldn't hit the pole, as well as existing trees such as that old growth tree that you saw. So we have located this site as close to the property line as was feasible. Additional detail that we provided along with our application is that this site is in the growth management area of Fort Collins. And that's important here because the Fort Collins workshop for small wireless facilities has a strong preference for arterial roadways. And if you think back to that slide I showed you with the search ring, you'll note that this site is located on an arterial roadway, whereas other roads in that search ring are actually in the neighborhoods. So this is a preferred location. There was a lot of due diligence put into the design and placement of small cells in Fort Collins, and thousands of hours of work over the last few years came to this highly vetted design that you saw earlier of the slim brown pole. So this was a design that was worked on with the community and Crown Castle to come up with something that was aesthetically pleasing as possible and still meet the objectives of the facility. It was moved as close to the property line as we can move it, and any further to one end would have put put this pole in a ravine, and any closer to the other side, there was that old growth tree with a root system that we couldn't disturb. Slide. So the siting here was optimized as much as possible, and again, it's located on an arterial roadway, not in one of these neighborhood streets in this search ring. As was mentioned by Mr. Whitley and in the denial letter, that consultation with adjacent property owners is an important consideration in ensuring the least impactful location. Although it's not in the land use code that we were required to consult with adjacent property owners as part of our application process. And there are many reasons why we don't actually do that as a matter of course. One, it pits neighbor against neighbor when the goal is to find a location that minimizes impact to all and not just to one resident. What ends up happening is county staff finds itself having to make a value judgment for an individual resident. And residents are unaware of the restrictions that we face in the right-of-way, such as tree root systems, right-of-way restrictions, and competing utilities. As I omitted earlier, though, the 250 feet is not a shall, it's a should in the event that it's not technically feasible. Well, in this neighborhood, it's not technically feasible to be 250 feet from a resident. As you saw on those slides, it's a relatively dense neighborhood. So I would allege that the error here is that one of the denial is based on failure to consult with adjacent neighbors, and that was not a requirement. Okay. Also in the denial letter, it was stated that per the urban area street standards, the pole must be located within 5 feet of the right-of-way line or 10 feet from the travel lane, whichever is restrictive. This would be another error that we would point to you in the denial letter. The section cited from Larimer County Urban Area Street Standards in fact state that the pole should be located within 5 feet of the right-of-way line or 10 feet from the travel lane, whichever is most restrictive. It's a should, not a shall. And I think that's important because it allows for deconfliction with other utilities, taking into consideration the old growth tree, and moving the pole closer to the right-of-way would have actually brought this particular site closer to residential properties than it is now. And moving the pole within 10 feet of the travel lane would have placed this pole in the recovery zone for the road. Okay.
Meredith, before you go on to the next location,
Actually, I have just had a few more wrap-up comments on this site. I wasn't going to go to the next location yet, but if you have a question.
no, let's wait until you make
Okay,
your wrap
okay.
up, and then we can.
Okay. One of the important things that needs to be noted as we go through this site and the other is that no state or, this is pursuant to the Telecommunications Act, no state or local government may regulate the placement or construction of a small wireless facility based on environmental effects of RF emissions if they comply with the FCC limits. And that's important to note because some of the comments that I read, ones that were provided to us earlier in the process and then ones today, mention the safety of RF facility. The county can't consider RF safety if we are within the federal law, the federal legal limits for RF safety. Also, federal law does not allow regulations that effectively prohibit the provision of wireless services. This means that in some circumstances, a local zoning regulation will be preempted by federal law, and a local government will be compelled to approve a facility that may not comply with its local rules, because if there's no other place to put that facility, it would amount to an effective prohibition of wireless services in that neighborhood. The county may only regulate aesthetics, and what that means is the county can deny a permit application if it would incommode the public use of the right-of-way. And incommode of the public use of the right-of-way means that the small cell order states that local aesthetic regulations must be, one, reasonable, and two, published in advance. Here they were published in advance, so I want to address that. But reasonableness means that under the law, the site is technically, that the restrictions are technically feasible and reasonably directed at mitigating aesthetic harm. So that's important here because if you think back to the pictures I showed you with the telephone poles, the wood utility poles and the wires overhead, is a restriction from putting this pole that we have proposed that is not quite on the property line on a street that contains other brown poles and overhead power lines. Is it reasonable to deny this particular pole because it's not right on a property line, but as close to one as it could be? Further, is it reasonable to deny this pole after it was heavily workshopped and chosen to be the most aesthetically pleasing design? So I submit that that wouldn't be reasonable considering the amount of man hours and thoughtfulness that went into the design for this particular small wireless facility. That would conclude this site.
Thank you, Meredith. Let's pause for a moment and just kind of take in what you just said. Yeah, Commissioner, please. Thank you.
Well, I just have a question. Weren't we going to go through the whole thing and then she was going to present again for the others? Or are we presenting the two? Or are we doing each one separately?
I think it's, my concern, and I think the council for them also has this concern because we'd spoken about it, was just you need clean records for both of these. And so the more that you mix them up, the harder it's going to be to have a clean record. And so my comment is it'd be better to just do this one, have public comment on this one, because there may be separate groups of neighbors. And then there's some stuff that's common to both of them. The legal things she just mentioned, the legal standards and the code, those are the same, but they're two different spots. And so I think it makes sense to keep them separate for that reason.
So she would just be presenting this one now and then we'd be moving into public comment.
Right.
And therefore, it would be appropriate to ask questions from us of the applicant on this one.
Yes. Yeah, you would be fine to do any of that, yeah. And I mean, honestly, we called them up at the same time. I mean, the answers in terms of the legal answers or whatever else are gonna be the same for both of them. So.
Okay. Welcome. Commissioner, do you have any questions or feedback at this time
I
for
do.
Meredith on this particular location?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Meredith, for your presentation. When you say the design was heavily workshopped, who was that heavily workshopped to? Was that just a group of, I mean, it wasn't the neighbors because it sounds like they weren't necessarily consulted. Is that right?
Right, I was not part of that process, but I would like to defer to my colleague, Matt Doran.
Yes, and if I may just expand on the question that I believe the commissioner is asking, and welcome, Matthew. Or is it Matthew or Matt?
Either's fine. Unless my mom's here, it's Matthew for
Well,
sure.
and actually, if you get to know me, I prefer the full name, so I will call you Matthew.
Thank you, Commissioner.
But to expand on what I think I understood from Commissioner Stevens, heavily workshopped, I mean, perhaps more specifically, what involvement from the neighbors and the community were they involved in this heavily workshopping of this particular design? So that's to expand.
No, Commissioner, they were not. Specifically, this workshop, as Meredith described, was specifically with the city of Fort Collins.
Okay, that's helpful. And would you please identify yourself for the record, sir?
Yes, Matthew Doran, Manager of Permitting Utilities for Crown Castle.
Great, thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
It does, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's all I have for now, thanks.
I have a question, please. So, in looking at the one picture that shows the three circles, the three small cell rings, there you go, thank you. It seems like, and I understand this particular technology is pretty focused on a small area, but if in the current proposed location, you're providing cell coverage to, it looks like 20 houses. Is that how it works? Can you help me understand that?
I want to qualify, neither Meredith or I are RF engineers, but we can represent what has been communicated to us from our customer, who is the wireless provider. And we will say that those rings represented are simply the geographic rings for the location, but they shouldn't be represented for actual coverage.
So the actual coverage is a greater area.
It very well could be, yes.
Very well could be.
Yes.
Thank you, Matthew. All right, I believe that's all I have for now. So do we go on to 106, or no? We allow an opportunity for public comment on this particular location. Thank you, and you'll have an opportunity to respond to the public comment. Thanks, Meredith. So at this time, Rebecca and colleagues, we will open up the public comment for this particular request, case 23-WCF 0105. Sir, would you like to come forward? And if you would be kind enough to identify yourself, and perhaps if we need help with the spelling of your name, and we typically will have about 3 minutes for folks to offer public comment.
Excuse me, my name is Gregory Bridwell, Bridwell. My wife Pamela, we and I are the residents, owners at 2404 Idledale, and that's the residence that is proposed. In fact, the distance from our house to that stake is 110 to 12 feet. It was in direct line of sight, but I understand now that it has been moved to the east, and it's still within line of sight of our house. It is on our property only and does not situate on either the west or the eastern property lines. So our question is, and I'm really newly informed that there is another ring of influence to the west that looks like a better site than what is positioned at our house. And I don't know what the influence or the power of that pole is. My cell phone signal is ideal. I have no problems with that. And so I don't know what this pole is trying to address. Other than what I've said, I really have no other point to make.
Thank you, Greg. And is it correct that regarding outreach, you folks were not contacted to discuss the placement of this pole?
Not at all.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone else here in person who wishes to offer public comment on this particular matter before us, before we get to the others? Okay. Rebecca, is there anyone online who wishes to offer public comment?
We do not have any members of the public currently on Zoom.
Thank you. Then we'll close public comment for this particular case before us, this request. And I think it's appropriate now, if Meredith or Matthew, if you folks want to come on up and maybe respond to Mr. Greg. And the last name is?
Bridwell.
What is it?
Greg Bridwell.
I believe it was
Bridwell.
Bridwell.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes, just like to note that the other rings were considered but they were determined not to be feasible for the intended coverage area for our customer. And I'm glad that he has excellent coverage. I want excellent coverage for everyone, as most people have moved away from landlines, and we now rely on wireless for almost, everything in our homes that are wireless enabled, our cell phones and our car navigation when we're driving around with our cell phone, using it for navigation, all relies on this technology. But our customer may be only one carrier, and it might be a different carrier than other people in the neighborhood already have. So our customer is trying to improve the density and capacity of their network in this particular area.
Thank you. All right, then. So, Commissioner Stevens, this would be an opportunity if you have questions for staff. And also, if you all could please help me out, clarify a little bit. So, when is the appropriate time for you all, for Michael, to respond to, what the applicants or the appellants have said regarding the rationale for their appeal, what they've determined to be in error? When does that happen?
I defer to Frank. Oh, well,
Go
actually,
ahead. Yeah, I was going to look to Frank too, but that could happen. If that is a response that you would like from staff, then Michael could provide that at this point in time. Really, we're at the point where you can ask any questions that you may have and enter into deliberation on this particular item at any time.
That's helpful. So, Commissioner, with that in mind, please, any questions that you may have, and also if you wish to have staff respond to some of what's been raised.
Yeah, my questions will be some of the questions that were raised anyway, so I think we'll cover both things.
Okay.
So I guess the first thing that was stated was that they did provide maps of the search area, which I guess are these three little rings. So how would you respond to that? Because it says that they weren't provided with the application. The director's comments.
so, and I'm reluctant to speak for the community development director, given that she is the one who made the determination, but I don't believe that the community development director felt that there was adequate information that said it needs to be this location and that these other two locations do not work from a technical perspective. And it was not clear, at least, again, kind of filtered through staff for the director to determine. It was not really clear that alternatives had been evaluated to say, okay, so that western location would not technically meet the coverage requirements. It was just that these were considered and this was specified. We did ask for information about, kind of the system as at large. As clarified by the applicant during her presentation, I guess we don't have the ability to ask for that, but that wasn't really clear from my perspective as we evaluated this. We wanted to see what are the full range of options, what's the full range of possibilities for location, which is going to be the most visually impactful. And again, from my perspective, it did not seem that we were given much opportunity to look at options. We were just told this is what's going to work based on our criteria.
Okay, so not a lot of just kind of, here's what we looked at and the other two options didn't work kind of thing, it sounds like.
Correct.
Okay.
Without a lot of supporting documentation.
Okay, thank you. There's been talk between City of Fort Collins and the GMA, and so the City of Fort Collins standards don't apply here, though, right? Our standards apply here.
That is correct,
correct?
although we did encourage the applicant to comply with City of Fort Collins design standards, and from all indications they did.
Okay.
We did send a referral to the City of Fort Collins, both for the initial applications and then also for the appeals, and we received no comment, positive or negative, from the city.
Okay.
However, when it comes down to it, it is our regulations that prevail.
And just because this has come up in other similar type hearings like this one, and I think the board knows, in the GMA, the agreement we have says that you're supposed to try to consider the planning that's going on in Fort Collins and how that's going to work and try to make it compatible. But it clearly says also that the ultimate decision is up to this board. So you have the power, you don't have to do what Fort Collins standards say or what they want. You're just supposed to consider it as part of the GMA.
Okay, so that came to the idea of like Fort Collins likes things to happen in the arterial roadway. Do we have any language that talks about that?
We do not.
Okay, so that piece is just something that they had picked up from Fort Collins. What about the consultation with the neighbors? They said it's not technically required and that they felt like the process pits neighbors against neighbors. But just maybe you can speak to just how we feel about that and what, to speak a little bit to our code and why we think that's important.
Yeah, I want to provide a little bit of context for the reasoning for that aspect of the denial. There's the standard in the code, section 9.4.2G, that says wireless cellular facilities shall not be within 250 feet of residential structures, essentially, unless it's technically infeasible. Unless there's no other technically feasible alternative. And it then states that the placement should be in the least visually impactful location. There are a couple code sections there too. Because they provided information to us that showed that it was not technically feasible to put the facility somewhere outside of a 250-foot radius of residences, we accepted and acknowledged that, yes, it is not feasible to place a facility that in a way that complies with that standard. So we need a demonstration that it's technically infeasible. They've met that bar, but we also need to know that it's the least visually impactful location. In order, in this context for this facility, to determine what is the least visually impactful location, the best way to do that is to talk with the people who look at this area every day and understand the view from their backyard, maybe stand in their backyard, stand on the street, stand in the neighbor's yard, and really understand what the visual perspective looks like. And so the lack of consultation with adjacent property owners was very concerning, in that it left missing information on what the visual impacts would be, or whether may have been a more less visually impactful location. So that was the rationale and the decision there. To the comment from the applicant about pitting neighbors against one another, and that it puts county staff in a hard position there. That is a position that county staff is in on all of our land use applications every day, and it's part of our professional responsibility to weigh those trade-offs, looking at analysis and looking at community input. When there is no community input, we are not put in a position to be able to weigh those trade-offs.
Okay.
I do think it's important to acknowledge, that we do have some applications where it requires them to notify neighbors within a certain amount of feet. And the applicant's correct to say that's not a requirement in this one. They didn't have any obligation to do that. And so to the extent that the board is going to consider that, it needs to be within the criteria that are applicable to this. So the applicant's right. We can't point to something saying you were required to notify neighbors within X amount of feet because it's not there. So any consideration about neighborhood notification needs to be done in the context of the applicable criteria that the director looked at to review it.
Thank you. Sorry, just one more question, Commissioner, and then I'll let you take a turn. Maybe two. With regard to the local aesthetic conversation, does the fact that there's other poles or other things, would you, and this is maybe too subjective and you can not answer it if you don't want to, but the idea that there's other sort of poles in the neighborhood, does that say that it's not reasonable to have this local aesthetic?
That is something we look at, and it actually does say in the code, and I could pull up the exact section if you cared to, that co-location is encouraged. So if there's an existing street light, it's encouraged that it co-locate on that existing street light. If there's an existing power pole, it's encouraged that there be co-location with that existing power pole. There were from the applicant's perspective, kind of there were conflicts with the utilities, but there was also no discussion about co-locating on those facilities. You might notice as you drive around Fort Collins, it's very common to see these sorts of, not, they don't look exactly like this, but they are these same small cell facility poles that have light fixtures on them. And I think these are functional light fixtures. I can think of several along the arterials, and there's actually one right in front of our office on Mountain Avenue. So co-location is encouraged. That was not proposed as an alternative to staff. I don't know if it was evaluated by the applicant or not.
So that co-location would say that an existing pole could also hold this, and that way you're not putting a new pole in a neighborhood, right?
That is preferred.
Is that right?
Yes.
And then, sorry, Commissioner, just one last question, and maybe, well, no, I'll go ahead and let Commissioner Kafalis ask some questions. Never mind. I'll be done now.
Thank you. I'll offer a question at this time. So some of the comments made by the applicant had to do with, in some of the correspondence, there was a reference to must as in a requirement, but in some cases with regard to should versus shall in terms of community engagement, and I believe in terms of what engineering or what is required of the location of the pole in relation to either the right-of-way, the 5-foot set right-of-way, or the 10-foot travel lane. Could anyone speak to that? Could that have led to any kind of miscommunication or confusion, should versus shall?
I would say that the code does say should as opposed to shall, but I would defer to David Pringle with the engineering department about just kind of the intent and what he's looking for in his review.
And I think if I remember right, reading the material in the referral agency letter, you make that statement that even though it's a should, that is the intent. But perhaps you could expand on that, David?
Yeah, the intent of that section is to help future build out of that roadway and really promote safety if that roadway were to be built out in the future, and just kind of push it away from the road.
Could you make sure you're talking into the mic, please?
Sorry. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
The intent of that was to push it away from the roadway to help promote future build out of that roadway.
What about the comment, I forget what the term is, but hopefully you'll know, the issue of the type of pole and the buffer thing, and, if a car were to hit it, it has some ability to...
That talks about the clear zone, and right now they do meet that clear zone, but we're not unsure of if that road were to be built out, that it would meet that clear zone requirement.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question, Commissioner, then we'll turn it back to you. I think, Rebecca, you referenced 9.4.2G, is that right, of the land use code? And you talked about the 250-foot setback from residential. But there's also a reference in there to where ideally that we should, a pole should be placed in the common side yard if there are two residences. Can Michael or someone speak to that? I think what I heard from the applicants was that because of that large tree with the root system, they really could not move it to the east, which might get it more in compliance with the code. But then I also thought I heard from Mr. Bidwell that they had planned to move the stake, or they had moved the stake to the east. I hope my questions are helpful.
Yeah, I can speak to that, and then Michael may have more to add if I miss anything. So calling up this image of the search rings, I think, is helpful, because if you look within that search ring, there are several locations within that ring that are on a property line, a common property line between two properties. It's not just Mr. Bridwell's property that could be considered there. There were no when in back and forth with the applicant, when we asked them to consider alternative locations and provide more information on what the options might be and how the options for locating on a common property line. There was no consideration of those other common property lines that could have been eligible or rationale for why those were excluded. There was information provided about this particular property that's located behind and why it was infeasible for this particular property to place the pole on either common property line, but not a consideration of why not the property to the east or the property to the west or another property in the area.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's helpful. Commissioner Stevens, do you have any other questions or comments at this time?
No, I think you answered you asked the questions that I had, so outstanding questions that I have, so I don't have anything else.
All right, then it appears that we can move into, am I missing something here? I don't believe I am. We can move into deliberation on this particular request.
Yes.
I'll start if that's fine. So thank you all for coming in. Was there some questions that people? Was there some?
The regulation says shall in number G, Article 9.
I'm sorry. What's going on?
Yeah, let's get some clarity of what's
The
happening.
member of the public was stating that there is a shall in the regulations, and actually, I would like to clarify. So there are some sections of the code, and I can put things up, that say shall for certain things. When I said should, I was talking about the location of the pole relative to the traveled way and to the property line. So in that section of the code, there is a shall be located. Or, I'm sorry, should. There are other sections of the code where shall is used. And one of those instances is it shall be located along common property lines. And I will pull that section up right here. So, let's see.
Shall be placed.
When placed near residential property, the wireless communication facility shall be placed adjacent to the common side yard property line between adjoining residential properties. So very quickly, I would like to go to, and actually the should that I was referring to is in the Larimer County Urban Area Street Standards. So it's not actually in the land use code. That's not a document I have pulled up. I could pull it up in a couple minutes, but so I did, after I said should, I put a little asterisk in my head. That is related to the right-of-way. There are other shalls, and so depending on which section of the regulations you're talking about, there are some shoulds, there are some shalls.
Thank you, Michael. I believe that's very helpful. And Commissioner, do you want to continue?
Well, it sounded like
I was just going to say, given that we've had that back and forth, you may want to see if the applicant has any other comment on that, but that's up to you.
Yes, thank you, Frank. Would you folks like to offer your comments on this bit of discussion here?
I have a couple of things I'd like to note. First, throughout our application process, there was considerable back and forth and comments with the staff during the application process. And as a result of those comments, we did in fact move the pole several times. And that was because of the tree to the east and other right-of-way restrictions. So there was discussion with the staff and the pole was shifted. Co-location was discussed, and co-location is...
One moment, Meredith. What?
I just have, we were just asking for clarification on that one piece. I don't think we were looking for a rebuttal from everything that staff just said. So
rewind?
I'm just asking, is it proper to,
It's up to the board how you want to proceed with
Well,
that.
I think Commissioner Stevens has a good point, and I'd like to respectfully ask that you focus on the discussion of should and shall, please.
Okay, so we don't have an opportunity to correct anything that was possibly misinterpreted? Okay. Yes, the denial letter said that the site shall be located within this certain restriction from the right-of-way when the code actually says should. That was the error that I was stating. I was not talking about the shall with regard to the property line. And yes, it does say shall in the land use code with regard to the property line. And my point in bringing that up before was that we have moved this as close to the property line as was possible, given that tree.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevens,
Yeah,
back to you, please.
thank you, thank you. So, thank you to the applicant and the folks that came out today to talk about this issue. So, our question here is, is there a preponderance of evidence that the director may have made an incorrect decision when they denied this application? I would suggest that, or I would affirm the director's decision to deny the application, and I'll just state a couple of reasons why that is. It seems clear to me that that they're under section 9.4.2.g that wireless communication facilities shall not be within 250 feet of any residential structure unless it's demonstrated there's no technically feasible alternative. It is within 250 feet of a residential structure, and there's just not clear evidence that there were alternatives that were contemplated, or that there was a full range of alternatives contemplated, nor was that really conveyed to staff very well. It sounds like they just didn't have enough information to be able to see if that full range of alternatives was contemplated. Secondly, with regard to section 9.4.3.e.4, I mean, it was mentioned that there's a lot of poles, but it doesn't look like co-location was. It's encouraged, but it doesn't. There's no indication that that was considered. And local aesthetic is important, and especially if there are a lot of poles, it's really important for us to sort of look for those co-location opportunities. And I just don't know that that was fully. I don't have any indication that that was fully vetted with the utilities that are existing in that area. Secondly, with regard to the sight line and talking to the neighbors, I mean, that's why we talk to the neighbors, so we can get an idea of what is acceptable to them. And so that wasn't done. And it's nice to think the aesthetics were heavily workshopped, but they weren't workshopped with the neighbors that matter the most, and that's the people who would be affected by this. So, it seems like that the homework wasn't done here. It seems like there's sections of our code that were not followed. We can argue about should or shall, but the fact of the matter is I just don't feel like we had enough alternatives, or our staff had enough alternatives to make sure that this was really the best location. And so for those reasons, I will be supporting the director and denying the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I appreciate you articulating the reasons. I agree. I agree with your interpretation of this, and also I don't feel that the Community Development Director administrative decision was an error based on the information presented today and the discussion, and therefore I would support affirming the director's decision on this particular matter, on this case. So with that, Commissioner Stevens, would you offer the motion, please?
I would, Mr. Chair. I move that the Board of County Commissioners affirm the director's decision to deny application 23-1 or WCF 0105.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. That is a proper motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. that passes 2-0. And I just wanted to point out that, didn't mention it earlier, that Commissioner Stevens didn't just walk out because she felt like walking out. She had a previous personal appointment that she could not miss, and that's why she's not here. I believe now we can move on to the next case, which is
Sure, Mr. Chair. I think that at this time, we can move forward. Mr. Whitley's given his presentation. We can incorporate that presentation into the beginning of this. We can go back through it if the board would like to get those details from him again. Otherwise, I think you can ask the applicant to move forward with their presentation on this.
and then, of course, and if there's public comment on this particular one.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Commissioner Stevens, do you have any questions or need for clarification from staff on this matter?
I do not at this point, thank you.
All right. Well, folks, I believe if you'd like to come forward and speak to this particular application. Thank you. Meredith.
Okay. Okay, this is the site that's at the corner of Dalton Drive and Mead Street. This is another view of the corner. And another view. Okay. The denial letter for this particular site requested a 1603 drawing, and the street standards for this particular application did not require a 1603 drawing. Post-appeal, we were asked for a 1606 drawing, and basically these drawings are designed to show that our pole would not interfere with any future sidewalk construction. Neither of these drawings reflect the conditions as they are today. What's important to note is the master license agreement that we have entered into with the county, and that master license agreement requires us to move our facility if a public works project is in conflict with it. So the existing conditions are, well, we believe there's room for sidewalk construction or changes to the sidewalk anyway, but in the event that it turns out not to be during a future public works project, we would have to move our site. Excellent. Okay. Again, this site has the same issue with a small search ring that was provided. And again, we had a small search ring that was provided because of the size of the coverage area and the density that we're looking to achieve. So that's why we provided the small search ring. And as I mentioned earlier, that federal law does not require us to submit any maps showing coverage for that reason, because these small cells are also aimed at density of the network and capacity, not just coverage. I'm sorry, not done with that. One thing I did want to note is that Crown Castle always considers co-location, because we prefer co-location when we build our small wireless facilities. It's always the first thing we look at, and we always seek to do that first. And if we do not co-locate, it's because we have ruled out that co-location is possible. And in this particular case, we did evaluate the only nearby streetlight and found that it was too short to accommodate a small wireless facility. And the fiberglass pole that would not structurally accommodate the small wireless facility. And I did want to point that out, since the concern on co-location on the previous site, but we always consider co-location first. I don't need to go through this slide too heavily, but again, this site is also within the growth management area of Fort Collins, and that the design is one that was part of those ones that would deem to be aesthetically pleasing. Next. And here is our search ring that was provided as part of the initial application that shows, and I did want to address again the 250 feet. It is not possible in this neighborhood to locate a small wireless facility that is greater than 250 feet or greater from a resident. It's just the density of the neighborhood and the amount of residences here makes it impossible. The proposed pole is at a corner location. This is important because the code, as we discussed before, states a preference for property lines or corner locations. And again, consultation by us with adjacent property owners is not required by the land use code. But on that note, I did want to address that it was not required for us to consult with property owners. However, the notice provided by the county did elicit comment. So even though we did not solicit consultation by the neighbors, the county did, and it was received. And not only that, although we don't solicit comments from adjacent landowners, we do visit sites in person and try to determine the site that is the most aesthetically pleasing and least obtrusive, because it is our goal to be good neighbors and not to build sites that make our neighbors unhappy. Okay, next slide. So in this particular case, we have minimized visual impact to the greatest extent possible. As you can see, there's some partial tree screening there between the resident and our proposed pole. The color blends in with the natural surrounding, and this is the proposed design, and it mimics this design on the right, which is the street light in the area. And again, it was evaluated for co-location and was not deemed to be something we could co-locate on. As I mentioned earlier, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, local decisions cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of wireless services. And I have these pictures just to reiterate that the densification of residences in these two neighborhoods, this is the first one we discussed earlier, and the one we're talking about now, prevent us from putting it more than 250 feet from a residence. So if a site's denied based on that, it amounts to an effective prohibition of wireless services that is in contravention of federal law. Again. And these last points, just again about RF emissions, that didn't come up in this site, so I won't belabor that point. But again, we chose this site on a corner, and we've designed a pole that mimics the street lights in the area. Co-location was considered, and I think this is the most aesthetically pleasing small wireless facility we can possibly put in this neighborhood. And again, the small search ring was provided to the county, and again, it was small because it has to be small to address the coverage area and capacity issues for our customer.
Thank you, Meredith. Commissioner, do you have any questions of the applicant?
Not right now.
Thank you. I'll ask, I think, two quick questions. One is, I recognize that the discussion about consultation with the landowners, but I mean, where this is being considered, that house on the corner, did anyone knock on the door and say, we're thinking of putting a pole in front of a small cell facility in your front yard?
We did not do that, but I know that there is a public notice part of the procedures by the county, which then resulted in their input. We do not go knock on doors.
Thank you, and perhaps staff can speak to that when we go to them. My last question, Meredith, and thank you, and maybe this is outside the realm of what we're trying to consider here, but can you help me to better understand? Well, thank you for clarifying. Crown Castle, you're the ones that put in the hardware, the infrastructure, and then you work with carriers. And how does it work in terms of the carrier in informing you all that there is a need? Because we did get some public input that everybody seems to be happy with their cell service. Can you speak to that? Is that?
So
I check with the attorney.
I can try to speak to it to the best I can in general terms, but the information provided to us by our customers highly confidential and proprietary. We are not at liberty to share that information at all. But what we can show you, obviously, is the rings that are provided to us, and that our engineers look at in conjunction with what our customer is looking to do to determine a shot group, if for lack of a better term, of places that a pole would meet our customer's objective. And yes, I may have great service in my neighborhood with the carrier I use, and my neighbor across the street may use a different carrier and have horrible service because that carrier does not have a small wireless facility in my neighborhood. So that's another part of the densification and capacity is another part of co-location, as a matter of fact, because we do endeavor to have more than one carrier on our small wireless facilities as possible. That is a good thing for the neighborhood because it prevents another carrier from coming in and putting up another pole across the street if they can just also co-locate their antennas on our facility, and it minimizes the small wireless facilities in the neighborhood, and it allows more carriers to expand capacity in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Meredith. And I totally understand about proprietary information, and I appreciate you responding to that question the way you did. I don't have any other questions of the applicants, so thank you. Why don't we now go to public comment, and then if we have follow-up questions you'll have a chance to respond to the public comment, and we can ask questions of staff. Thank you very much. Well, we'll now open up public comment, and it looks like there's at least one person who is interested in coming forward. Welcome. I think you've probably figured out the routine by now. Have about 3 minutes. If you could please identify yourself and perhaps spell your name.
Thank you. My name is Ashley Waddell. That's Waddell. With my wife, Christy Brockway, we are owners of the property across the street from the proposed tower, and we have serious concerns that we outlined in a letter we sent to Michael Whitley on March 31st, which I understand has been passed to you, urging you to affirm Larimer County Engineering Department's denial of this project. In that letter, I shared concerns about the proposed tower, mainly being completely unnecessary. We already have great coverage. We have used a number of different companies over the years and have never had a landline in the 16 years we've lived there, so we're well covered, and our neighborhood is already fully developed, so there's no proposed expansion of our neighborhood. This is being imposed on us by Crown Castle, which has not reached out to any of us despite county engineers urging them to do so, and it's in violation of Larimer County's requirement that wireless communication facilities shall not be closer than 250 feet to residences. Since I drafted that letter, I've done further research and have 2 additional concerns about long-term risks to human health and the inevitable hit in property value that all of our properties would sustain. On health, I'll start by saying that my sources for this RF non-ionizing radiation being hazardous don't come from the tinfoil hat crowd.
And Ashley, forgive me for interrupting, and I guess you certainly can make your comments, but as has been stated, and it is our understanding that FCC or federal law does not allow us to take health concerns into consideration. So please keep that in mind. It's one of those strange things, perhaps.
It is a strange thing, in part because the FCC right now is being litigated in Washington, D.C. for its failure to protect human health because of the preponderance of evidence that this RF radiation is very hazardous as a carcinogen, causing heart damage, a number of other issues, especially in children. The other argument then, if I'm not allowed to share evidence about these health concerns, which are very serious, is the risk to our property values. There are a number of sources from a number of different real estate agencies and real estate associations that show that more than 95% of people would have hesitations about buying a property adjacent to or with a tower on it. And it has shown, that this has a detrimental effect on property values. And when this tower is just not necessary, there is truly no reason to impact our lives in this way. And so I very respectfully urge you to affirm the engineering department's denial of the project.
Ashley, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
public comment. Is there anyone else in the audience? Okay.
I really have nothing to add.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for being present. Rebecca, is there anyone who wishes to offer public comment on this particular case via the Zoom or by phone?
We do not have any members of the public on Zoom still.
Thank you, Rebecca. Then we'll close public comment. And the applicants, if you folks would like to respond to some of what you heard.
Okay. First, I'll address the comment that this is unnecessary. Our customers determined that it is necessary as part of their network, and as again I said before, I can't share that as it's proprietary. But it's not just about coverage; it's also about capacity. And capacity means that the more cell phone users that maybe switch to that carrier, or the more devices that are added to the network of that carrier, then more capacity is needed. So when you think about all of the things today that are driven by our wireless connections, our Blink security cameras, our Ring doorbells, our smart appliances, our navigation systems, all these things that are now wireless, they call it the Internet of Things, all of these things require this technology to operate. So that's why this 5G densification is necessary, because of the greater number of things that are now being added to the network and will continue to be added to the network. Not just coverage, capacity as well for all the carriers, not necessarily the one that's our customer in this particular case. And with regard to being that we were urged to consult with landowners, as a matter of fact, we were not urged to consult with landowners until we got the denial letter stating that we didn't consult with landowners. That was raised in the denial letter, not earlier on in the multiple back and forths we had with staff regarding the site. And another note regarding property values, that that's another area that local jurisdictions are not supposed to consider. And that the reason for that is that under federal law, we are guaranteed right access to the right-of-way because we are a utility. We are a utility providing telecommunications service, and therefore we have a right to be in the right-of-way. And yes, there are challenges right now to the FCC regulations concerning the RF, but it's just challenges. And the FCC RF legislation is still good law. It still stands. It has not been overturned.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Do you have any questions? I don't have any questions. So, do you have any questions of staff, Commissioner Stevens?
I do have some questions of staff. So the applicant referred to the master license agreement about, because one of the concerns was that there couldn't build ramps and things in that space. So I assume it's true that they would have to move it if it wasn't required, but can you just expand a little bit on why that feels problematic to staff?
Yeah, and I'll let David add on to any additional comments, but just from staff's perspective, the preference is to site it such that it wouldn't need to be relocated if there were road improvements or adjacent right-of-way improvements such as sidewalks, access ramps, et cetera. because if it's properly located in the first place, then you wouldn't have to relocate the pole. It's located in such a manner that those improvements can be accommodated without the need to remove and replace.
And, I mean, it could delay a project or something like that. I mean, could it potentially delay a project or make a project more difficult, having that there?
Potentially, if the pole was not moved in a timely manner, although it is specified in the master license agreement that it would need to be removed or relocated within a certain time frame, upon request. And I don't have the exact section in front of me, but I could look it up if you cared to. But it's a matter of, is it within a certain time frame if it becomes necessary, or is it just not necessary because it was located in such a way that contemplated future improvements?
So just kind of future, kind of for good planning purposes and for, just looking out into the future, it's best to sort of do it right the first time to something that wouldn't have to be moved, and then the whole process has to start over again for both staff and the applicant.
Correct.
What about, so the small search ring kind of question has come up again, and the applicant talked about federal law not requiring maps. So, but we can require maps, right? I mean, in this case, does like federal law supersede, what we're asking for? Or, are we okay in asking for these maps, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'd like to clarify kind of what was asked for and some of the back and forth. We did, as staff, ask for coverage maps to try to understand where the gaps were that they're trying to fill, and their response back was that they didn't need to provide that information, and it wasn't relevant because these small cell facilities, as has been stated, are related more to capacity than coverage, and so those maps were not provided to us. We did get the search ring here. What was not provided that we needed to be able to assess the placement of this small cell properly was an assessment of what other alternatives could be considered in the area. And this map here does show kind of their search ring now, and we understand that, but really understanding why this location had to be chosen. There was no information that provided any justification for this particular dot on the map and why it had to be located here. And that's the information that we're missing, was really understanding the breadth of alternatives that may be an option here, not as a matter of trying to oppose the placement of a small cell in this general area.
Okay. And when Michael talked about sort of the history of the agreement that we've had with them, there were it initially covered some things in sort of the Estes Park area or something like that. And had those been built out? Those were.
I don't know if they've actually been constructed. I think several of them have. I don't know if all of them have, but okay. Those permits were issued. At least the supplemental site licenses were approved in June of 2022.
Yeah. So the idea that we're not trying to prohibit wireless services here. In fact, we've approved several others, but we do have some rules that have to be followed when we do that. Would that be an accurate statement? Do you feel like
that is accurate?
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
That's
and I'll just add there's a higher bar with these particular applications, or this particular application being that it is within 250 feet of residences, and the code says it shall not be located within 250 feet unless it's demonstrated that it's technically infeasible and minimizes visual impact. So that's that additional bar that some other small cell facilities may not have had to meet.
And I guess in this case, the applicant has stated why the idea of locating the small wireless facility beyond 250 feet from one's house because of the density of the neighborhood was not feasible. But the other part of the land use code provision states Well, unless it's not technically feasible, and it sounds like Rebecca and Michael, you were suggesting that that discussion never occurred, and that would have been helpful to better understand the breadth of the alternatives.
Yeah, I think we've, and I'll see if Michael has more to add. I think we accept that it's technically infeasible. If there is a need to densify service in this area, and this is a highly populated area, then a small cell facility needs to be located somewhere closer than 250 feet from a residence. What is not clear is whether this exact location is the least impactful location that meets those needs in this area.
And that would have been my answer too. So we were not presented any other alternatives, but this one location for this particular node. There were some alternative locations for the southern property that we already discussed, the southern node, but there was not a presentation of, well, it could go here or here or here. It was just presented as, this is our proposal, and we did ask for alternatives. We did not receive alternatives.
Thank you. One other question that I have is on the matter of notification. I've heard two somewhat alternative comments on that, suggesting that we sent out notifications within a 500-foot radius, and that wasn't really the obligation or the responsibility of the company in this case. Can you speak to that?
So yes, we did send out notice of the application to properties within 500 feet, but that's a notification that the application had been received. The idea of choosing the location that is the most or least visually intrusive is a matter of consultation with neighbors and, kind of discussion about, kind of the sensitivities or desires of the neighborhood. But then also, even without consultation, just even alternatives, which again, we were not provided with this particular application. We were not given, it needs to be A or B or C. It was just, this is A and this is what we need to, this is where it needs to be. And we did ask for, kind of alternatives that were not provided.
Yeah, and if I could just add one more thing. Thank you, Michael. The applicant stated that they were not asked to do consultation prior to the denial letter, and that's not correct. In your packet, it's page 328 of the packet, is the comment letter that city staff provided to Crown Castle with Crown Castle's responses back. And so those comments were provided by staff in October of 2023. And there's a long paragraph in one of those comments that asks, has there been consultation with the neighbors that under what alternatives are there, and requests that type of consultation occur. And the response back was, we have not consulted with neighbors. And so that was one of the bases of denial.
Thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner Stevens?
No, Mr. Chair.
And given that in the previous case, we allowed an opportunity for the applicants to come back up, and didn't we do that before?
You did that before. It's in the discretion of the chair. You gave them the opportunity for a rebuttal to the comments from the public. To the extent you want to give them more opportunity to comment or you have questions for them, you're certainly entitled to do that. It's not going to, the problem is if you start giving the public more chance to comment or something like that,
right,
you have to give them a chance to respond to that.
Well,
it's not going to be, you're not going to get penalized for giving them a chance to comment more, but you don't have to.
Well, I suppose in the spirit of fairness, we should give the applicant an opportunity to come up and, if you wish to comment, and then we'll move into the final phase of the hearing. You guys want to come up, or?
We don't have any additional comments.
Okay. Thank you. Well, if there are no other questions, I guess with just the two of us, Commissioner Stevens, it's back to you if you want to begin the deliberation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. There again, thank you to the applicants for coming forward and for the neighbors that came forward as well today. I will be affirming the director's decision to deny the application in this case as well. After hearing staff and hearing the applicants, it just sounds like there were pieces of this application that just weren't fully baked. We need to make a good decision for our community, and without having those alternatives presented, we don't know that due diligence has been done here. And so I understand the restrictions of the 250 feet is not feasible in a dense neighborhood. But when there's no alternatives, or to not even see that the applicants sort of done their homework to say, hey, these are the places we tried and these is why they didn't work. That to me is an incomplete application. It's hard to make a good decision when we're charged with making land use decisions. And our code clearly states that that we need to have a feasible alternative. And circles on a map, we just didn't have enough information to, I don't believe the director had enough information to make a good decision. So, I'm referring to section 9.4.2.g. I don't see a demonstration that there's no other technically feasible alternative, and I don't see that's presented. And there seems to be some, there's a lot of back and forth here on what was done. But when the director clearly says that we also asked the applicant to go to the public, and that's how you would decide, whether we were meeting aesthetics, and that wasn't done. I just feel like I'm kind of questioning why wouldn't you have just provided a more complete application? Because I don't sense any thing from the staff and not from us that we want to prohibit wireless services in any kind of way. But what we don't have is good, enough information to make a good decision. And that's what we're charged with doing in our communities, is making good land use decisions. And our neighbors are relying on us to do that. So I realize federal law doesn't require some maps, but we're really just asking for, hey, why didn't you choose some of these other places? Why weren't some other places chosen? And if they were contemplated and not chosen, why? I don't think that's a heavy burden to ask for somebody who's asking for something in this neighborhood. Our land use is quite clear on what we need when we make these decisions. And so, I don't know, you're telling us now that it couldn't be co-located, but that's not clear whether our staff had that information. So I just feel like the applicant hasn't shown that they've met our land use code. And while we're not allowed to deny, we are allowed to make decisions based on our land use code here. And some of those decisions are aesthetic, but they do go to quality of life in our neighborhoods. And so those are the reasons that I'll be supporting the director's decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm afraid I'll also be affirming saying that to the applicants, affirming the Community Development Director's decision. I think that if we go back to the reasons why the application was denied, for me, one of the most important things is that the matter of limited visual impact or impact on the community, that there wasn't adequate information being provided that would help inform how could we make this less visually impactful. And so I think that's a critical thing. And I agree with the other statements that Commissioner Stevens has made. I just think whether it's should or shall or whatever, there needs to be involvement by the community, by the neighborhood, especially if you're looking to put a small wireless facility pole, right in one's front yard. So therefore, I will concur with my colleague And based on the information provided, I do not believe that the director, our community development director, has erred based on the evidence.
Would you like me to make a motion, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I move that the Board of County Commissioners affirm the Director's decision to deny the application 23 WCF 0106.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Proper motion. Any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that passes 2-0. I believe we have completed our business this afternoon. At 5:39 PM, we are adjourned.